They say that my house is haunted. I haven't been living here for very long, but I know better that it isn't. That doesn't mean that kids, urban explorers, and ghost chasers don't still show up to investigate. Most of the time they're surprised to see someone is now living in this house outside of town. Usually, especially with the more respectful ones, they apologize and ask if I've been witness to anything strange or paranormal. When I tell them that no, nothing paranormal happens, there is no ghost haunting the grounds, it's all just a work of fiction, they thank me and leave. On a handful of occasions, the bolder ones ask to see the inside. Depending on my mood, I've allowed it more often than not, assuming that once they see the furnished inside and nothing happens, they will spread the word and I can be left alone in the end. There was only 2 that caught me on a bad day, which resulted in me yelling at them for wasting their time and mine, and that I just want to live out the rest of my days in peace. So far all of this has seemed to help me, although I'm not sure if the anger or compliance has aided me more. Visits dwindled over the past year that I have lived here, and I haven't seen any thrill-seeking lurker on my property for a good 3 or 4 months. I still get odd looks when I go into town and hear the whispered conversations that they don't try hard enough to hide. The recent lack of strangers showing up is part of the reason I was mildly surprised when I spied a group of college-aged kids creeping towards the front door one night last month. I was walking from the kitchen into the living room when I first saw their movements across the moonlit yard. At first I shook my head to myself, cursing adventurous young adult and teens for trying to scare themselves. If only they knew the true horrors in the world, then they might be less inclined to search for something that would make their heart race. The flash of a memory burned briefly in my mind, and my frown turned into a small smile as I recalled how adventurous and ambitious I was once upon a time. Why not have a little fun with these youngsters, then? There is no ghost here, might as well give them a little bit of a scare. I quietly stepped to my front door and slid the lock out of place without making a sound. I didn't want to alert the outsiders to my presence just yet. I listened intently and waited as they neared the porch. I heard the wooden planks creak under their weight and murmurs about how it was too dark to see inside the windows. When I heard them just on the opposite side of the door, I twisted the handle and yanked the door open as fast as I could, while bellowing out, "What do you want?" In an instant, I saw that there were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl. I kept my smirk to myself as I mused for a second about the girl probably either trying to prove herself as one of the guys or being dragged along, pressured by one or all of them. My mind quickly dropped the train of thought when 3 of the figures leapt from the porch and took a few hurried steps into the yard, putting some distance between themselves and what frightened them. Only one remained standing before me, the girl. I saw her breath catch for a moment, but then her head raised defiantly in brave determination. "Sorry, sir. We didn't think anyone lived here," she spoke in a hesitant tone that grew stronger with each word. "Well, someone does live here," I responded, carefully crafting my words with a tone that I hoped sounded void of animosity but still retained power. The girl didn't answer, only stared at me, so I asked her, "Well? Penny, let's go," one of the young men yelled after her. "Is your house really haunted?" she asked, ignoring her friend. "Penny, is it?" "No, the house is not haunted," I answered. "It's short for Penelope. Did you know that your house is believed to be haunted?" she continued. "Yes, Penelope, I did know that. Most of the brave kids such as you and your friends have discovered that already and made the conscious decision to leave me alone," I said. "I'm from out of town, so I guess I missed that memo," she responded. It sounded like it was accompanied by a smirk, but without any lights on her face. It was impossible for me to see it. "You are quite braver than your friends, it would seem. Would you care to come in for a cup of tea and a story?" From my experience, not many know the full legend of the ghost that was assumed to haunt these walls. "Of course, you probably wouldn't believe the real story," I offered. Her silence told me that she was considering the offer. If she was smart enough, she would know that she shouldn't enter the house of a strange man, but then again, I knew better than many others that sometimes pride and curiosity can burn brighter than intelligence. I saw her silhouette turn as she yelled over her shoulder, "You go on ahead, I'll catch up later." "Are you fucking kidding me, Penny? What if he kills you or something?" A male voice called back to her. It was a different one than the first I had heard. "Are you planning on killing me or torturing me or raping me or something?" Penelope asked, turning back to me. "I don't go around torturing and raping young women, how barbaric," I answered her. "I think I can handle myself," she hollered back to her friends. I stepped aside so she could enter the house. Once she was inside, she turned and waved to her friends. As I shut the door, I saw them shaking their heads, shrugging, and walking away. "Tea or coffee?" I asked my new guest as I locked the door and began walking to the kitchen. "I'd prefer coffee if it's no trouble," she answered, following me. I led her into the modest room and flipped the light switch before gesturing for her to take a seat at the small table. She did, and I approached the counter, pulling a coffee maker towards me and fetching the grounds from the cupboard above. Absent-mindedly, I scooped some of the dark granules into a filter that I placed in the top of the maker. I filled the water reservoir and turned on the pot before taking a seat across from the young woman. I took a moment to study her. She had high cheekbones, but otherwise her features were soft. Brown hair fell to just past her shoulders and her intense eyes were amber in color, something not commonly found. I had seen similar shades in my travels before, but seeing these reminded me of the first amber eyes I ever saw. If I was a weaker man, I might have teared up at the familiarity. "So, tell me, Penelope, what have you heard about this house?" I asked her as the machine on the counter began to heat up and make small gurgling noises. She shrugged. "Just that it's haunted. They say you can hear a woman crying loudly on some nights, a heartbreaking lament." "And hearing a woman cry interests you?" She chuckled softly. "If it's coming from a ghost, sure. Anything for a glimpse of the other side," I mused aloud with a small smile. She shrugged. We sat in silence while the coffee finished making. I was surprised to note that she didn't look to be feeling as awkward as others in her situation might. Instead, she seemed rather calm and content. Within minutes, the mechanical pot stopped making gurgling noises and I stood to pour some into 2 mugs. I placed one in front of her along with 2 small pots, one containing sugar and the other holding creamer. Once she mixed in the amount of each to her satisfaction, I motioned for her to follow me into the living room. I seated myself in a worn leather armchair. For as much as the dark fabric had been through, it still held itself together and supported my weight perfectly. I took a long sip of my own steaming black coffee while Penelope took her place in another chair beside mine. Both chairs faced a fireplace that hadn't seen flames in a very long time. It was still comforting for me to be able to see the mantel and brick that gave way to a dark and dirty space. Both chairs were angled so that the fireplace was easily the main focal point, but the inhabitants could also comfortably turn to see each other. I glanced at the young woman before reaching to the table between us and turning on the small lamp. It cast shadows about the room that would typically bring fearful thoughts to anyone. The woman wasn't typical, though. She was strong and unafraid. Why do you think the woman would cry? I asked my guest before beginning the story. She thought for a minute while sipping the hot liquid, then responded, I'm sure everyone has their own theories, but I would assume that she lost someone dear to her, maybe a kid or husband or something. Ah, yes, loss is a terrible thing. Losing someone of great importance to you can cause a sorrow and heartache unlike any imaginable torture. The pain of the heart is so much more potent than the pain of the body, I said, losing myself for a moment in thoughts of the one I had lost so long ago. Heartbreak and misfortune were not foreign to me. Instead, they had taken up residence in my soul and refused to leave. So did she? Penelope's voice brought me back to the present. I looked up at her from my blank stare pointed at the floor. Yes, this house saw a woman lose everything, including herself. There was no child, though. What do you mean she lost herself? She asked. For that to be answered, I must tell you the story itself. But first, one more question. What do you know about werewolves? One edge of my mouth curled up into a half smile as I looked at her over my cup before taking another drink. Werewolves? They're humans that turn into a wolf with the full moon. Legends of them are found in various regions of the world, all with different information, theories, and lore, she answered. What if there were more than just legend and myth? Yes, depending on where you are in the world, there are different ways one might become a wolf. Who's to say what's the full truth or not? For the sake of this tale, though, I ask that you believe they are real and accept the information I give you without comment. I spoke. Okay. She nodded slowly and trailed off. Then let me begin. Almost 2 long decades ago, there was a young man who lived far away from here. He was 18, stubborn, and resilient, but mostly importantly, he was in love. The young lady his heart belonged to was beautiful with long dark hair and bright eyes. Her name was Evangeline and she loved him, too. Her family kept a secret, though, and because of this secret, they didn't approve of the young couple's dreams to travel. Evangeline knew this, and although she dreamed with him of distant places, her heart was always heavy with the thought she would never be allowed to join his adventures. One day she finally shared her secret with him and explained why she couldn't leave her home like they were constantly imagining. The sweet, angelic girl became a wolf during the full moon every month. Unlike other breeds of the beast, she was not bitten or turned by choice. She was born into it. She explained to her love that there were different types of werewolves, some being made into what they were and others like herself, being cursed from their family's blood. For generations, her family was careful to keep their secret from being exposed to the public. In an attempt to avoid becoming dangerous, they long ago decided to forego the ancient traditions of feasting on human flesh. They learned that if they formed their diet to mostly be vegetable-based as humans, they could better control their wolf side when it emerged. This aided them in being sure that they only hunted animals when in their wolf form. Over the years, there had been some mistakes, and if a wolf had the taste of human blood, they would become ravenous for it. A few times the family had to put one of their own down because of this, including Evangeline's own uncle, her father's brother. As a result, her father was strict and wanted to keep her close to home until he died. He was afraid, terrified that something might happen to his beautiful daughter. He wanted her safe and alive. When Evangeline explained this to the young man, tears rolled down her face. She cried for what she was, for what she had no control over. She cried with the knowledge that the man would most likely leave her, whether he believed what she said or not. He had no reason not to believe her, though. and although skeptical, he held her close and kissed her head. The next full moon, he was allowed to be there when she changed. Unlike most tales, her family adored the young man and approved of their relationship, just not of their wanting to leave. Months went by and he stayed true to her. She fell deeper into their love than she ever thought was possible. The night of her 18th birthday, he proposed and she said yes. The wedding plans were hollow, though. While their families were excitedly helping them choose flowers and food, the couple was secretly planning to run away together. They loved each other with the depth of the deepest chasm, and Evangeline knew that her husband-to-be could handle what she was and could keep her safe. One night, her window was slid open without a sound. Evangeline looked out and saw the love of her life waiting there. She carefully and quietly gathered the bag she had packed and hidden under her bed, then climbed through the window. They stole away into the night, across the grounds of her family's home, down a side street, and then out of town in his car. Life on the run was thrilling at first. They covered their tracks and used fake names while making their way to their coastal destination. Often, she missed her family and wished there was a way to be there when her pregnant mother gave birth to her little sister. In those moments, her lover would gently squeeze her hand or pull her close, and with a deep breath of him, she would relax and remember that it had to be this way if they were to live the life they felt destined to live. She didn't just run away to be with him, after all. She ran away to be free. For a year they took their time crossing the country. They were in no rush to get to the coast and spent months at a time in different towns and seeing everything wondrous that they could. Before reaching their destination, they wanted to behold all the beauty on the way. Then they would continue to do the same across the world. Greece, France, Egypt, Turkey, China, South Africa, India, Iceland, and everywhere in between would be their home. Sadly, they didn't make it very far. I paused my story to look at Penelope. Between sips of her coffee, I could see that she was engrossed, and when I stopped, her eyes widened. "How far did they make it?" she asked, urging me to continue. I smiled and drained my mug before setting it on the table. They stopped at a small town, planning on saving up some money for a couple of months to be able to afford the cost of boat fare. They weren't to the coast just yet, but they both adored the quaint town and agreed it would be a nice place to finally get married. They went to the courthouse with the kind older couple they were renting a home from as their witnesses. For the love of the town in which they wed, they stayed longer than expected. Perhaps it was being stationary for so long, or maybe Evangeline's feeling of homesickness or the loss of excitement in their freedom, but they began arguing on an almost weekly basis. She missed her family, and in the year they had been gone, her sister had been born and she had never been able to even lay eyes on her. After a particularly nasty bout, the young husband spent an evening at a local bar. While intoxicated, he ended up getting into a fight with a local man. They both were kicked out of the establishment, and after punching the man hard enough to lay him on his back, he left to return home. Evangeline threw her arms around him when he walked in the door, and they apologized to one another. He hadn't ever been gone that long from her, and her anger had subsided to worry, causing her to realize that she loved this man and was more afraid of losing him than fighting with him. They talked into the night and agreed to make a trip back to their hometown before leaving the country. They hoped that the time spent away would be proof to Evangeline's family that she could handle being gone and that she was okay. The night of the full moon brought trouble, though. That was the night that the man from the bar chose to appear on their doorstep, friends in tow, looking for revenge. What they didn't expect was to be interrupted by a wolf emerging from the trees while they dragged the man out of his home in an attempt to beat him. The wolf lunged and bared her teeth, growling and snarling for them to leave. In human form, she would have been able to easily keep herself in line, but as a wolf, her emotions raged and she attacked the threat to her love. Wolves don't think like people do, and in the moment, she was only concerned with saving her husband. Truly, she didn't expect to cause more harm than a scare, but in the end, 3 men lay in the grass, bloody and torn, while the wolf swallowed blood and flesh. The young couple disappeared after that. They couldn't return to their families and they couldn't stay in that town any longer. They knew that. The thought of killing his beloved was unbearable, though, so they devised a plan to keep her chained and locked up during the dangerous wolf nights. They swore to each other that they would do anything to protect one another and keep this from becoming a danger to anyone on the outside. How foolish they were. What Evangeline did not know was that not only does a wolf have a change in appetite when introduced to human meat, but also the person changes. Over the course of several months, she became harsh and cold. Their love cooled and fizzled. She was no longer the same loving and warm woman she had once been. If asked, she might not even have been able to explain why she was still with the man when her love for him had died that night with the men she killed. Her husband, though, felt indebted to her and responsible for keeping her from harming anyone else. It became more and more apparent that she was hungry for the unspeakable, and after a while, she was able to convince him that she should be allowed to roam free as a wolf. He didn't trust her at first, but when there were no reports of animal attacks on nights that she was gone, he began to believe that maybe she did have some sort of control. He wouldn't find out for several months that the control he thought she had was not the same as the truth. She did have some sort of control, yes, but only to the extent that she would stalk a victim as a human and then as a wolf, she would kill them. By stalking them during the days, she was able to keep her mind trained on that one person and would satiate her bloodlust with transients and others who would not be missed or even reported missing for a good while. After being on the run for almost another full year, they came across an abandoned house outside of a large city. The man was tired and heartbroken, having found out the truth of her hunts long ago. They agreed to stay put in that house and even fixed up the basement so it might contain her. As they worked together to create a livable home, a spark of their old love reignited. Hope was once again found in his eyes, and there were moments where she looked at him as if she loved him again. Perhaps she did still love him in some way. Finally, the day came that she wrapped her arms around him like she hadn't done in such a long time. She looked deep into his eyes and told him that she loved him. For 3 months after, everything seemed right in the world once more. He stopped dreading her kills and even helped her pick out places where she could find prey. They agreed it would be only people who not only wouldn't be missed or noticed but also held some sort of evil in their hearts. Evangeline tried to stick to their code, but it proved difficult for her. Living on the edge of a city brought too many temptations and her hunger continued to grow. Disappearances began being reported and grisly murders were being discovered. Body parts turned up in odd places and it began to be suspected that a serial killer was on the loose. With each full moon, Evangeline became more and more unrestrained, and with each morning, the guilt grew and weighed heavily on her heart and mind. As a human, she had seemed to push through the behavioral changes, but as a wolf, she had lost all control. One kill was no longer enough for a month. She had progressed to killing 3 or 4 in a single night. Realizing the dangers of her roaming free, they began chaining her in the basement on nights she would turn. They even furnished the room with a comfortable bed in hopes that she would wake on it and not feel like a prisoner in their own home. It worked for 2 months, but in the 3rd month, she was able to break the chains and escape to hunt the streets of the city. Evangeline's husband heard the crash of the window breaking and rushed to follow the wolf, armed with more chains. tranquilizers, and if need be, a large silver knife to protect himself from the woman he loved. He found her over the still twitching body of a teenager. Life had just left the unsuspecting victim. The man readied himself for his attempt to put the animal into a slumber deep enough to last at least the trip home. The dart left the gun with a small sound. The wolf's ears shifted with the noise and she turned to face her human lover. In a flash, the dart lodged itself into her chest while she pounced on the new threat. He threw an arm in front of his face as he was knocked to the ground. While on his back, his forearm lodged in the beast's mouth, he struggled to grip two more darts in his free hand. The darts fell away, and as the wolf began to yank his arm from its socket, he grabbed the only thing he knew could save him, the silver blade. The knife pressed through the fur and skin easier than he thought it would. The jaws of the wolf loosened as it stepped back, staggering on its feet. The man used his good arm to push himself up. With a whimper, the animal locked eyes with him and fell to her side. They were no longer the eyes of a wolf, but rather the bright amber eyes of the woman he loved. He quickly stood and touched the wolf as her eyes closed. She wasn't dead, but he knew that it wouldn't be long before she was. He struggled much but managed to bring the wolf back to their home and into the basement. The sun was rising as her eyes opened again and she took a deep, harrowed breath. It destroyed him to see her naked form lying on the floor, knife still in her chest. She tried to get up but was weak from blood loss. With one arm, he helped her the best he could and soon she was lying in the bed. Through a short tear-soaked conversation, she told him this was necessary. She thanked him for loving her and said how she was glad he was the one to do this. She guided his hand to wrap around the hilt of the knife and told him that he needed to sink it deeper into her chest, to be sure her heart was pierced through in order for the wolf to die with her. He begged her not to make him do this. He pleaded with her not to leave him. In the end, though, he looked into her eyes one last time as his hand, still covered by hers, was pushed deep into her body. I stopped speaking and focused my gaze on the empty fireplace. This story always broke my heart. That was this house, wasn't it? Penelope asked after a moment of silence. Her speech was quiet and sad, heavily affected by the tale. I cleared my throat and looked at her again. Yes, it was this house. The bed in the basement is still even there. But there is no ghost. Evangeline did not return from the grave. Can I see it? She asked me timidly. My eyes narrowed and I felt myself harden, slightly taken aback by the request. After holding my breath for 3 seconds, I let it out in a sigh and nodded. I suppose so. Follow me and I'll finish the story while we walk, I said, standing up. Finish the story? But she died. Penelope stood, following suit. Yes, but the man lived, I answered and began leading her through the hall and to the door at the end of the house that opened to a staircase down. Although not born of the wolf curse, he was bitten by one who was. It didn't take but a month for him to understand what that meant, and once he turned the first time, he knew how much of a curse it really was. His body snapped and bent, bones broke and moved. He felt like he was dying. When it was done, though, he felt the freedom of running. So that's what he did. He ran. As a human and as a wolf, he ran through cities and towns, deserts and oases. He crossed rivers and oceans, countries and continents. He hated what he was, but he used it to his advantage. You see, Penelope, a wolf has an excellent sense of smell and werewolves have their own sort of scent. One werewolf can sniff out another easily, and there seems to be a sort of sense there even when in human form. Very few things on the planet can mask this sense or the specific scent of a fellow wolf. He taught himself the ways of tracking and hunting. He vowed that he would spend his life making up the mistakes he had made with Evangeline. He allowed her to kill humans, to roam free, to tear apart families. He blamed the wolf in her and the wolf in himself for everything that had gone wrong. So he hunted them. He turned his curse into a tool and he traveled the world, searching out and destroying any werewolf he could find. The work took a toll on him, though. He couldn't enjoy traveling the world without Evangeline, and finally, he decided to return to his home country, tired, weathered, and ready to disappear. We reached the bottom of the stairs and I turned on the light. With the illumination of the room, a closed door could be seen on the opposite wall. I stopped halfway to it when I realized that Penelope's footsteps were no longer behind me. I turned to face her and saw fire in her eyes. And what about Evangeline's family? What about that baby sister? Did the man never tell them what happened? Did he ever atone for that sin? She asked through gritted teeth. Her hands were at her sides, one in a fist and one gripping a pistol. I remained calm as I answered with a sorrowful tone, "No, Penelope, I never saw or spoke to her family again." And why not? Didn't we deserve to have the truth? Did you know that my father spent years looking for her only to find out that she was dead? Did it ever cross your mind about how her little sister would grow up hearing stories of a sibling she would never get to meet, a sibling that was stolen from her? How hard do you think I had to fight for my own freedom? And what of her body? Did you even bury her properly? She demanded. I sighed and gestured to the door. Do you want to see her room? Penelope didn't answer, only glared and watched me cross the rest of the room. I opened the door and stepped inside. After a moment, she joined me and stood in the doorway. I watched her face twist and change as she beheld the sight. I approached the bed and touched the corpse that still remained on it. "You're so cold," I addressed the body. It was decayed but still somehow intact. "What the hell?" I heard Penelope whisper from behind me. I came back when I heard that people claimed the house was haunted. I said aloud to my wife, "You know, I want to hate you for everything that happened. You made me fall in love. You made me hope. You made me into the monster that I became. And then you left me." Tears welled up in my eyes and I knelt next to the bed. I hadn't been able to come back down here since moving back. Seeing her body again after so long, I could no longer contain myself. I wanted there to be a ghost. I've begged for hours to hear her voice one more time. I've cried out and pleaded but she never came. That's how I know that the house is not haunted. Oh, how I wish it was. That was the last thing I wanted in this world. I told Penelope without turning to even look at her. "You don't deserve that," she said in a flat tone. "No, I suppose you're right, but don't you realize how incredible it is that you would find us here? I came back to die. I wanted a sign that she was still here so I could die in peace. But lo and behold, I return and hear not only whispers of a ghost that doesn't exist, but also rumors of a wild animal on the loose. I couldn't say goodbye to this world with the knowledge that there was another wolf on the loose, so here I still am, at least for the moment." "Did you really think you covered up your tracks that well?" I asked her, finally looking into those eyes that were almost the exact replica of Evangeline's. She raised the pistol to be level with my head. "Doesn't matter, you're not leaving this room." I jumped up and grabbed the knife that had been at home in a corpse for the past 19 years. The gun fired as I lunged at her. Her mistake was that I even wanted to survive past the hour. I didn't, but I would take her down with me. The pain hit me just as I shoved the blade unceremoniously into her heart. Her eyes widened as she dropped the gun and then fell in a heap. I let my own body fall and felt warm blood pool around me. I begged one last time to hear Evangeline's voice as I closed my eyes, ready to die. She made a mistake, though. Penelope didn't use silver bullets and she wasn't a good shot, even at such a short distance. The hole just below my shoulder healed quickly, the wolf in me ensuring survival. And now, a month later, I find myself writing this. Perhaps I feel the need to confess. I've taken countless lives and honestly I don't regret the ones I've hunted. The only death I wish I could have changed is that of Evangeline. I don't want you to worry, though, if you bear this curse. I'm done with hunting. I'm done with killing. I'm tired, and although I have lived a short time, my life has been too long. I think it is time to say goodbye and use that silver knife one last time. For a year, I proved that there was no ghost in this house. For a year, I wandered my home, wishing there was but never hearing her. I dream of her, though, almost every night. And finally, her voice has begun to whisper to me in my waking hours. She does not cry and she does not tell me she loves me. She is angry and I know that there will be no escaping her wrath now.